Now turning our focus to France, where French lawmakers are set to hold a key vote today on a new law which aims to target Islamist extremism. While the French government maintains the law will combat Islamist separatism, critics say that the law is discriminatory and targets France's 5.7 million Muslim community, the largest in Europe. The legislation aims to curb online hate speech of the kind that led to the killing of Samuel Paty, the school teacher who was beheaded after showing cartoons of Prophet Muhammad in class. The law will also punish doctors who provide so-called virginity certificates for religious marriages, clamp down on homeschooling for children over 3 years old, and stricter financial controls will be put in place on foreign funding of religious organizations in France. The law is dubbed the anti-separatism bill, as French lawmakers fear Islamists are creating communities that reject France's secular identity and laws as well as its values such as equality between the sexes. With debates in the lower house now completed and 313 amendments accepted, the draft bill will now be voted on today. The bill is also widely expected to be passed at the Senate and becoming a law within the next few months. Now, lecturer in French Studies, University of Warwick, Dr. David Lees is joining us live from Nottingham. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, while the French government maintains the law will combat Islamist separatism, critics say that the law is discriminatory and that it targets France's 5.7 million Muslim community. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I think you've already summed it up very well there. This is a very divided issue and divisive issue in France. There are people in, as you say, France has the largest Muslim community in Europe. France has a long history of welcoming Muslim migrants, largely from North Africa, previously the former French colonies, particularly in Algeria, Morocco and Tunisia. So there are long-established Muslim communities in France who have equally long-established traditions of schooling and education and culture. But as you say, this is a very divisive issue, and particularly those on the centre-right and extreme right are really looking at this to try to make headway in a political way ahead of next year's presidential elections in France. Emmanuel Macron, of course, the incumbent president, has an overwhelming majority in the National Assembly, hence why the bill has passed through so successfully there. He doesn't have the same majority in the Senate, but the Senate is controlled by the centre-right, and so I would expect, as you said already, that it would go through the Senate quite easily. This is not to suggest that there are, there's a majority of people in France who back this bill. I think it's, again, a divisive thing amongst ordinary French people, in a sense that it's largely along political lines. So those people on the centre-left in France tend to be more favourable to the idea of having Muslim schools, a larger Muslim community and so on, yes. Whereas those on the centre-right and extreme right tend to be on the other side of the spectrum and are really there trying to gain political traction.
All right, and also French lawmakers are set to hold a key vote today on the law which aims to target Islamist extremism, as we just mentioned. How do you assess this, and how do you assess the impact that this will have on the country and those opposing the bill?
Well, I think that, as I say, I think that the lawmakers in the National Assembly, the French Parliament, and again in the Senate, it's perhaps understandable why they would put this through. I mean, there were a number of amendments, as you said, tabled particularly by the Socialists, a small Socialist party on the left wing. In terms of the impact in France as a whole, I would say this is going to be relatively minimal. Now, of course, there has been, there were a number of very high-profile Islamist terrorist attacks in France, particularly under the presidency of François Hollande, and you've mentioned again the recent tragic killing of Paty under Emmanuel Macron. So Emmanuel Macron is trying to do something which François Hollande failed to do, and try to really clamp down on that extremism. So in that sense, I suspect that some of those elements of extremism may be dampened down, but equally this risks alienating people who are more moderate in the Muslim community. And that for me is the real risk of this policy, and indeed all of Macron's policies in this area, is that they risk really undermining the moderate presence of Muslim educators, imams, mosques and so on, which for a long time have been present in French society and have not sought to destabilise the French community. But in this case, what I think it risks doing is challenging that, really. So in terms of the longer term vision of this plan, on the one hand, I think it will have very minimal impact for most people in France, but for the Muslim community, I suspect it will feel quite alienating. And for some people, that may, of course, then lead to extremism in their own right. So having sought to try to sort of diminish extremism and try to clamp it down, on the other hand, this could actually lead to increased extremism simply because those people who are more moderate now feel that they're now being sort of disillusioned and disenfranchised by the French Republic. So it is a very divisive move, and I do wonder really whether at the heart of this there is a political aspect around Emmanuel Macron trying to steal votes from the centre-right and the extreme right in particular. Of course, the major opposition party in France at the moment is the extreme right Rassemblement National party under Marine Le Pen, and she is likely to be the only major opposition figure to Macron in his bid to be re-elected next year for the presidency. So I do think there's a political element to this as well for Macron's future.
All right, Dr. Davis, you've just mentioned about the impact, but just for more clarity on this, how effective do you think this bill is when it comes to clamping down on extremism?
Well, as I say, I think it could go both ways. On the one hand, I think for those people who are already radicalised, there's a sense, firstly, around funding. You've already mentioned funding for Muslim schools, for Muslim cultural hubs and so on. There's going to be greater emphasis on that. There's going to be greater emphasis on things like homeschooling, as you said, and particularly around the medical profession and what they can do. So in terms of people who are already radicalised and already extremists, I think it could be quite successful. But what the risk is here, really, I think, is that it will risk alienating people who are not already radicalised, simply because it seems to be penalising and discriminating a particular community in French society. And there's unfortunately a long-term trend of the French state discriminating against particular religious groups. So it began, most recently, of course, with the Jewish community discriminated against during the Second World War in France, leading to many thousands of Jewish people being deported during the Holocaust. And now it seems to be that the Muslim community is being targeted. So I do think that's potentially the real risk there. So in terms of those who are already been taken onto that extreme wing of Islamist terrorism, then it could well work. But as I say, the real risk is alienating those people who are not already radicalised.
Absolutely, Dr. David Lees. Thank you so much for joining us with all those details. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.